Building the pyramids of the Nile Valley almost 5,000 years ago was the most ambitious and spectacular undertaking ever achieved by mankind. The pharaohs of Egypt were so powerful that they sought eternal life, and the pyramids, their colossal tombs, would bring them closer to this wish. Come with us now as we explore the pyramids designed for eternity. The pyramids we're most familiar with seeing are the magnificent structures at Giza. But the story of the pyramids originates not in Giza, but 12 miles farther south, in an area known as Saqqara. Today, a silent span of desert separates Saqqara from Giza. But this was once an immense necropolis, the burial place for the inhabitants of Memphis, capital of the ancient kingdom. This is the Step Pyramid, the oldest stone monument in the world. It was built by the Pharaoh Djoser around 2600 BC and designed by Imhotep, the first architect whose name would live on in history. Imhotep's design work was so revolutionary and successful at that time that he was later deified, one of the few non-royals to achieve that distinction. Votive statues in his honor are at the Cairo Museum. For the Saqqara Pyramid, Imhotep chose to layer 6 mastabas, low rectangular stone structures normally erected over tombs, one on top of the other, to reach an overall height of almost 200 feet. Pharaoh Djoser had a stone portrait of himself placed in the serdab, a sealed chamber in the pyramid. And he had 2 holes made in the wall so that he could observe the outside world for all eternity. His is the first life-size stone portrait in the history of mankind. The original is also in the Cairo Museum. Unfortunately, his face was mutilated and irreparably damaged during the robbery of gemstones which were set in the orbit of his eyes. The Saqqara Pyramid is surrounded by several beautifully built constructions that emulate in stone the sheaves of rushes and matting used for ceilings in the houses of nearby Memphis. The ancient city is now completely buried over. Only some palm trees, sand, and a small farming community exist where the great city once stood. At Saqqara, a huge wall surrounded the sacred area of the pharaoh's tomb. The wall was over half a mile long and almost 50 feet high. The 14 stone doors that can be seen along the wall were all false, except for one, the real point of access, which faced south. To get to the sacred area, worshippers had to walk down a long avenue lined with 40 sculpted columns, which would have originally been painted. Their shape recalls the sheaves of straw and reeds used to protect brick columns. This passage gave access to the interior of the complex, to the courtyards, chapels, and sanctuaries. Even though they were modeled to give the impression of real buildings, they are mainly imitations set with false doors. At the end of the avenue is the large interior courtyard, with the pyramid rising up in the center. the first noble stone construction created for one man. A man who was concerned the world would forget him. A man who ensured it would not. Besides the monuments of pharaohs and princesses, there were many high officials who wanted to build their own tomb in Saqqara, like the tomb of Ti. The mastaba of Ti, where his wife and son were also buried, is one of the largest and most richly endowed tombs in the Saqqara necropolis. It is possible to gain access to Ti's burial chamber from the courtyard by means of a long, sloping passageway that leads to an underground crypt, where Ti's sarcophagus is preserved in a starkly decorated chamber. The extreme simplicity of this room is in stark contrast to the rich decorations found in the rest of the mastaba. The upper chambers in the tomb are decorated with a series of figures portraying scenes from the daily lives of the dead man and his family. Ti was an important state official, inspector of the pyramids of Abu Sir, as well as being the official court hairdresser. And here, emerging from the past, is the statue of Ti, seen as it was at the time of the pharaohs almost 5,000 years ago. More than 80 pyramids have been rediscovered in Egypt, all of them built on the western bank of the Nile, the side where the sun goes down. South of Saqqara, near the oasis of Fayum, archeologists discovered a pyramid of historical importance because of its unique features. The pyramid at Meidum, built for the pharaoh Snefru, founder of the 4th dynasty. Why is this pyramid different from all the others? The monument was originally a step pyramid, like the one in Saqqara. But here in Meidum, the architects working for the pharaoh Snefru believed they had found the secret of the perfect form. They would abandon the previous step structure, fill in the platforms, and make the line of the pyramid smooth and sloping. It was a revolutionary concept. But something went wrong. The bases of the 4 external supporting walls fell in, and the blocks of limestone slipped downward, revealing the internal part that we see today. Like the pyramid in Saqqara, the Meidum pyramid was also surrounded by tombs of princes and dignitaries. The statues of Prince Rahotep and his wife, on display at the Cairo Museum, were found here. When archaeologists discovered the statues of Rahotep and Nofret, the workers taking part in the dig were terrified by their intense expression, which they believed was too lifelike to be that of mere statues. Pharaoh Snefru had another pyramid built, the Pyramid of Dashur, universally known as the Bent Pyramid. Dashur is the modern name of this area south of Saqqara. Another monumental construction, it was worked on by thousands of builders and dozens of architects. While a step pyramid may have provided a stair by which the king ascended to heaven after his death, the true pyramids probably reflect a change to a solar cult, symbolizing the sun's rays radiating down. This construction was the first one to be designed from the very beginning as a true pyramid with smooth, sloping sides. However, when the pyramid had reached about half of its planned height, the angle of the external walls was abruptly reduced, thus creating its characteristic bent profile. The reasons behind this surprising decision have intrigued scholars for centuries. The hypothesis seems to be that the architects preferred to reduce the angle in order to avoid overloading the structure by excessively sloping the sides of the pyramid. This pyramid is one of the most important in ancient Egypt, as well as being the only one that has preserved its original limestone casing. The lessons learned by Snefru's architects were absorbed by the architects working for his son, Pharaoh Cheops, who built the pyramid that was to become one of the 7 wonders of the world. It is north on the Nile that we find the area where perhaps the most exciting chapter in the story of the pyramids took place. On the outskirts of Cairo, the modern-day capital of Egypt, is a small village called Giza. Giza grew up in a haphazard fashion in the recent Egyptian population explosion. In Egypt, a new baby is born every 20 seconds. Cairo now has a population of over 15 million inhabitants. And yet, Giza is a suburb unlike any other, because wherever you look, you see the imposing bulk of a pyramid. On this plateau, set on the edge of the desert, the story of the pyramids achieved its finest hour. It is here that we best appreciate the grandeur and majesty of these constructions and the organizational skills and methods used to erect them. The workers here were organized into teams that hauled blocks of stone on huge sleds mounted on logs of wood. Each team was made up of about 1,000 men, organized along military lines and led by a master mason and various underlings. They were not slaves. They earned a regular wage, bed, and board. It is thanks to their work that these immense structures were ever completed. Even today, such imposing buildings would involve complex engineering problems. The Great Pyramid of Cheops, which was the first one to be built in Giza about 2500 BC, has a base that covers over 12 acres, and each side is longer than 2 football fields. But here's what's amazing. The base is leveled off so perfectly that there is never more than an inch of error. How did they do this? This level of precision was achieved with simple measuring rods and lines of cords, and by observing the sun and the stars. They might also have employed the use of spirit levels for the horizontal lines. More than 2,300,000 blocks of stone were needed to build the base. They weigh between 2 tons and 200 tons each. It may sound incredible, but this was once a lush green land with neither desert nor buildings here. Irrigation canals linked the area to the Nile, and some of the stones used in building were transported on these canals. A boat made with cedar wood, built almost 5,000 years ago, was discovered here in 1954 near the Pyramid of Cheops, still in a perfect state of preservation. Archeologists found it belonged to the Pharaoh Cheops himself. 140 feet long, equipped with 12 oars. It was probably used by Cheops when he traveled along the Nile. On those occasions, his subjects could get a glimpse of their pharaoh and pay homage to him. Originally, the pyramids were covered in a very smooth limestone casing, which can be seen at the Pyramid of Khafre only at its tip. It was so smooth that the 1st century Roman historian Pliny described how local inhabitants used to have fun sliding down the steep sides of the pyramids. According to the historian Herodotus, more than 100,000 men worked for almost 10 years just to build the causeway that ran from the river to the plateau on which the Pyramid of Cheops stands. And yet, such lavish and grandiose undertakings were not always appreciated. The enemies of Pharaoh Cheops spread a rumor that the pharaoh forced his daughter into prostitution in order to make up the necessary funds. This may or may not be true. What we do know is that Cheops was not very popular with his subjects, which is perhaps why this tiny statue in the Cairo Museum is the only one of this powerful pharaoh that has survived. The whole complex was later expanded with the construction of 2 other pyramids, which then, as now, added to its majestic grandeur. Khafre, the son of Cheops, built a pyramid that was slightly lower than his father's, but looks higher because it's built on top of a small plateau. Then Mycerinus, the last pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, erected the smallest of the three pyramids, which is 213 feet high. Though they're majestic from the outside, going inside the pyramids is an extraordinary experience. Access to the Pyramid of Cheops is through a rough passageway that was dug out at the side of the pyramid in the 9th century to enable the followers of the Caliph al-Mamun to reach the burial chamber and steal its treasures. In 1001 Nights, there is a description of the magical riches of the Pharaohs. Inside the Western Pyramid are granite chambers filled with precious gems, unimaginable quantities of gold coins, and magnificent instruments and arms spread with miraculous ointments to prevent them from rusting until Judgment Day. A steep climb inside the pyramid brings you to the burial chamber of Pharaoh Cheops. Only the king's austere granite sarcophagus remains, empty, damaged, and with the cover missing. Centuries and centuries ago, unknown hands rifled all the contents without the least respect for the pharaoh's mummified body. In ancient Egypt, mummifying bodies spread over time from being the exclusive privilege of the pharaoh to a practice followed by large groups of the population. It represented continuity of life after death. For this ancient civilization, the soul and the body were considered to be of equal importance. Thus, one needed to be well prepared for the afterlife. More than 500 million people were born and died during the reign of the pharaohs, and most of them were mummified. Each of them received funeral honors that were proportionate to their wealth. In fact, the treatment was available in luxury, mid-range, and economy versions. The mummification procedure took from 20 to 70 days, during which the internal organs were removed and the body was dehydrated. Special terracotta containers were used to conserve the lungs, stomach, liver, and intestines. The brain was thrown away, as the ancient Egyptians believed that it was of no use. Embalming was then carried out to toughen the skin. The corpse was often filled with mud and sawdust to help maintain its shape. Then it was wrapped in layers and layers of linen bandages. Lastly, the mummy was enclosed in a wooden sarcophagus. This is the mummy of the great Ramses II, the warrior pharaoh who erected more statues and buildings than any other Egyptian king. It is on display alongside other pharaohs and princesses in the Cairo Museum. Pyramids and the images of mummies that inhabited them are not the only draw at Giza. This statue of the great Sphinx has inflamed the imaginations of men throughout the ages, a statue of mystery and enigma. The Sphinx is the largest outdoor sculpture in the ancient world. It portrays a sitting lion with a human head, perhaps that of Pharaoh Khephren, and faces the rising sun in the east. Carved out of the bare rock, its dimensions are gigantic, 65 feet high and 187 feet long. The nose alone measures 5 feet. The face has been damaged on many occasions, by the arrows fired by the Mameluke artillery, by the desert winds, and even by the cannons of Napoleon's army. Sandstorms have eroded the statue in various areas, and Cairo's severe pollution levels are a serious threat for the Sphinx. It has undergone restoration on several occasions to prevent further deterioration. When it was built, it was resplendent with color. It wore a nemes, the royal headdress with the sacred serpent, and it was painted in very bright colors. The face was red, and the false beard worn by every pharaoh was yellow and blue. Even today, the reasons behind the construction of this enormous statue remain a bit of a mystery. According to Greek tradition, those unable to solve the puzzle of the Sphinx were devoured. But others feel the Sphinx was built simply to guard the Great Pyramids of Giza. It seems to have carried out this job well, as the pyramids are the only structures of the 7 wonders of the world that are still standing today. After Giza, the pharaohs focused on building temples like the ones in Karnak or Luxor. These structures, however, cannot be compared to the perfect forms of the pyramids, the man-made mountains that confirm the unity of earth and heaven. The great complex at Giza remains one of the supreme architectural and logistical achievements of the human race. The Pharaoh Cheops left us with these words: "My pyramid shall be an indestructible monument, such as none has been created in God's time. It shall bear my name, and shall be an eternal cry that will say for all time, Cheops is he who from now on will belong forever to the universe." He has certainly left us a monument to enthrall us for eternity. Mexico, the summer of the year 1519. A traveler reaches the royal palace of the great Montezuma, bringing news which is both incredible and unsettling. The man says he's seen a mountain floating on the water which moved without ever touching land. The priests of the great temple are worried. Is it some sort of threat? What god or demon could cause such a strange phenomenon? Montezuma, on the other hand, is convinced that the mysterious sighting heralds the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, the return of a powerful god to his people. But he's wrong. The floating mountain is about to let onto his shores treacherous men with pale skin and thick beards who've come from a land far away. And Montezuma would soon find out that the arrival of these men foreshadowed the end of the glorious and powerful Aztec Empire. In Mexico City, during excavation work in 1978 near the cathedral, a heavy slab was unearthed, decorated with magnificent bas-reliefs that someone a very long time ago had smashed and buried. Researchers wondered who could have smashed this beautiful work of art, and why. To find these answers, we have to go back in time to the year 1519, when Mexico City, one of the world's largest and most populated cities, did not yet exist. In its place was an extraordinary and incredible city, Tenochtitlán. This was the capital and the heart of the grandiose Aztec Empire. The monarch, who had the power of life and death over his subjects, was Montezuma II, descendant of another Montezuma, the great leader who founded the empire and built the grand monuments at Tenochtitlán. Like his ancestor, Montezuma was a highly religious sovereign, particularly devoted to the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, to whom hundreds of temples were dedicated. Quetzalcoatl was an extremely benevolent god, the only god in the Aztec pantheon opposed to human sacrifices. The sacred texts state that the god had left the land promising that he would return to redeem his people. And according to the Aztec calendar, the year 1519, by our current calendar, ended one of the sacred cycles. This meant that Quetzalcoatl would soon return, and that's what Montezuma thought when he heard of the floating mountain on the sea. But in 1519, it was not a god that arrived, but conquistador Hernan Cortes. And the floating mountain was a Spanish galleon full of soldiers and weapons. Thinking he was a god, the Aztecs received Cortes with honors and adulation. In return, Cortes went on to destroy the Aztec capital and exterminate its population. Montezuma died, and his successor, Cuitlahuac, was forced to surrender. But how was such a rout possible? The invaders wielded devastating weapons and equipment completely unknown to the indigenous population: cannons, rifles, pistols, and horses, which proved to be formidable war machines. The conquistadors inadvertently brought another devastating weapon, a viral disease, smallpox. Smallpox found virgin territory in the New World. Millions died, over 2/3 of the Aztec population. Among them, the last king, Cuauhtémoc, whose death marked the end of the great ancient civilization of the Aztecs. Maybe if there were no disease, the Aztec soldiers might have fared better against the invaders. They were considered noble warriors and often used predators like eagles as their symbols of strength. These 6-foot statues, now in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, depict how they would have looked. The statues once guarded the gates to a temple called, appropriately, Temple of the Warriors. Tenochtitlán was a grand city that stood in the middle of a large lake on a plateau surrounded by mountains. The first inhabitants of the area were tenacious souls who did not shy away from hardship. They transformed their settlement into one of the most extensive and populous metropolises of the then-known world. Their projects included dams, canals, and the draining of swamps. When the soldiers would come back from victorious battles with their spoils of war, they would visit the big market of Tlatelolco. Here they might try to bargain for some precious fabric or rare bird feathers to enrich their attire. Tlatelolco stood at the present site of Mexico City's Plaza de las Tres Culturas. Remains of the ancient Aztec market are still found here, along with traces of a more recent past. Archeologists have unearthed a main pyramid, rebuilt 14 times, along with other pyramids, platforms, stairs, and altars. In the middle of the plaza stands the Baroque church of Santiago de Tlatelolco, and not far off, the modern-day Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Unfortunately, to build this skyscraper and the adjacent road, the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl and a minor temple dedicated to his worship were sacrificed. Tlatelolco probably wasn't much different from a modern Mexican market. The faces, the voices, the smells, and the many colors of the fruits, vegetables, spices, meats, and other goods for sale are probably the same. Europeans owe the richness of their cuisine to the peoples of America. Until they discovered the New World, they knew nothing of potatoes, tomatoes, corn, peppers, or eggplant. At Tlatelolco, Fabrics, skins, pottery, and other commonly used objects were displayed and traded by Aztec merchants called pochtacans. They would hawk their goods not for currency like gold coins, but in trade for precious cocoa beans. The market was the commercial heart of their world, but it was also the unfortunate theater for the last desperate resistance by the Aztecs during the siege of their capital in the year 1521. After the Spaniards conquered the area, they started building structures of their own, like the Cathedral of Mexico City. But instead of quarrying for new stones, they used stones from an Aztec temple dedicated to the god Huitzilopochtli. Construction of the cathedral was begun in 1573, but 250 years would pass before it was finished, ending up as a mix of very different styles. In spite of great efforts to consolidate its foundations, the cathedral is now unavoidably sinking into the swampy ground, an ironic end to a monument erected by the conquistadors to erase all traces of the glorious Tenochtitlán. Until the year 1978, it appeared as though the invaders had succeeded in their malicious intent. But then something completely unexpected happened. During excavation work for the Mexico City subway, workers digging a trench near the cathedral stumbled upon pieces of a gigantic and mysterious oval stone with a diameter of over 7 feet and a weight of nearly 9 tons. The stone was immediately identified as an Aztec relic and was truly an extraordinary find, inaugurating a new era for modern Mexican archaeology. The earth would soon yield the ancient vestiges of Tenochtitlán, an exceptional discovery comparable to that of the city of Troy. The archaeologist in charge of the work couldn't have had a more apt name: Eduardo Matos Montezuma. He decided to demolish a whole block of the modern city and give back to Mexicans the heart of their ancient capital. From the many relics that have now been discovered, scientists are able to imagine how the magnificent ancient capital might have looked. The center of Tenochtitlán, situated between the cathedral and the Palacio Nacional on the Grand Plaza of the Zócalo, was mainly a place of worship, full of temples erected on the tops of pyramids with their characteristic steep stairways and colorful wall paintings. The city, at an elevation of over 6,500 feet, was surrounded by the lake, hills, and mountains. It was connected to the mainland by many causeways and interlaced with navigable canals. It was a great metropolis with over 1,200,000 inhabitants. The ceremonial center, Teocalli, had many temples dedicated to important gods. The most imposing was the Templo Mayor, the religious heart of Tenochtitlán, the destination for pilgrims and home for priests and divinities. Only priests were allowed to climb to the top of the pyramid and enter the 2 temples. On either side of the temple, there were 2 other sacred constructions dedicated to the gods Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca. Teocalli also had dwellings reserved for those in the priesthood and playing fields for an Aztec ball game, which had more of a spiritual meaning than a sporting one. The players were the priests themselves. And lastly, there was the famous Altar of the Skulls, the Tzompantli, where the craniums of human sacrifice victims were displayed. For the Aztecs, religious rites and sacrifices were a necessity, the only way to earn the benevolence of the gods. They believed they were warding off famine, natural disasters, and defeats in battle. and the greatest sacrifice they could make was a human one. The priests made them lie on their backs on narrow sacrificial stones, then cut open their chests and pulled out pulsating hearts as an offering to the idols before them. This description by a Spaniard illustrates one of these sacrifices, made in honor of Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war. There were quite a lot of Aztec gods that demanded human sacrifices. Tlaloc, the god of rain. Coatlicue, the earth goddess, depicted as an old masked woman wearing a narrow skirt tied at the waist with a belt of serpents. Xutecutli, god of fire. Mayahuel, goddess of inebriating beverages, especially the most popular at the time, pulque. The excavation work of ancient Tenochtitlán lasted 5 years and brought to light over 7,000 objects, including sculptures, small artifacts, votive offerings, and the skulls of sacrifice victims. Most of the relics are kept in the very modern Museo del Templo Mayor. The stone that sparked the excavation work is in the place of honor in the center of the museum. The disc is decorated with a bas-relief portraying the goddess Coyolosh Hauqui, she who paints her face with bells, the Aztec moon goddess. Her body appears dismembered on the sculpted surface. According to legend, she was killed and cut to pieces by her brother, the god of war, who held her responsible for having tried to kill their mother, Coatlicue, goddess of the earth. Another wonderful relic in the museum, and the only one of its kind, is this terracotta statue of the bat god, a divinity of the underworld for worship of the dead. There are also many masks portraying the deceased and mythological beings. The Aztec people were filled with supernatural and mythological tales. Elders spoke of a magical and rich city with splendid palaces that existed right here on Earth. The city was called Teotihuacan, the place where men became gods. These pyramids and ruins are what remains of this once majestic city. In the 4th and 5th centuries, the 6th largest city in the world. When the Aztecs lived, the place was abandoned, partially swallowed up by the jungle. But the Aztecs still believed that the incredible pyramids were built by the gods thousands of years earlier, and they made pilgrimages to the site. Archaeologists found that the city of Teotihuacan was established in 200 BC by the peoples of the Mexico Valley. The pyramids, some of the most extraordinary monuments in the Americas, were built around 200 AD. At its zenith, Teotihuacan had grown to cover an area of almost 8 square miles and had almost 200,000 inhabitants. The monumental complex lies in the high Anahuac Valley in a barren and arid landscape that heightens its magical and mysterious atmosphere. It now attracts numerous people who gather here regularly to celebrate the rite of the salute to the sun. The city is bisected by a grand avenue, 130 feet wide and over a mile long, that is called the Avenue of the Dead. To the east stands Tenochtitlan, a building complex rich in murals. The paintings depict Tlalocan, a paradise with abundant water, butterflies, and flowers. Tlalocan was the world that was governed by Tlaloc, the god of rain. At the end of the Avenue of the Dead is the Ciutadela, the citadel, at whose center stands the pyramid dedicated to the god Quetzalcoatl. It is one of the most important buildings in the area. Next to its base are statues carved out of limestone and painted with natural pigments that used to decorate the pyramid. They represent the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl. Originally, they were painted in bright colors. The undulating bodies of the serpents emerged from the walls of the pyramids, and the god's head was wreathed in a crown of feathers. In 1986, the excavations of the Tenochtitlán yielded an exceptional find, a sepulchre with the skeletons of 18 priests killed during a sacrifice. Until then, it was believed that only prisoners, slaves, or enemies were sacrificed on the altars. Here was proof that the rite of sacrifice did not discriminate. The most imposing sight, however, is in the Plaza del Sol. Along with the ruins of an altar and several temples stands the Pyramid of the Sun. 230 feet tall, 740 feet long on each side of the base, it is almost as big as the Egyptian Pyramid of Cheops at Giza, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Thousands of tourists make the steep but memorable climb to the top, a perfect place to take in the majesty of the entire complex. Ancient civilizations believed that both the sun and the moon were created at this site. From here you can also see the other great pyramid of Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Moon. Smaller than the Sun Pyramid, it's 130 feet high with a square base measuring 460 feet on each side. Yet despite these structures that have seemed to last an eternity, no one has figured out why the city and the culture disappeared so suddenly. The end apparently came around 750 AD. Some archaeologists feel the city was destroyed and burned, and its inhabitants fled. But no one knows who was responsible for the massacre, or what became of the survivors. Other experts have linked the decline of Teotihuacan simply to a change in the climate, which may have caused the already dry area to become uninhabitable. But that would not explain the fires and the devastation. Thus, the mystery of the lost city of Teotihuacan, where men became gods, lives on. One of the most incredible finds in the history of Mexican archaeology is the Sunstone. Miraculously escaping the fury of the Spanish, it was found in 1790 in Mexico City and incorporated into the eastern facade of the cathedral. The fascinating symbols incised into this Aztec treasure placed it at the center of numerous religious events. The relic can now be seen at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, a museum that contains many testaments to the origins and the histories of the peoples who populated Central America over the course of the millennia. A beautifully sculpted monkey-shaped receptacle made of extremely fragile black obsidian, heads carved in volcanic rock with eyes and teeth made of mother of pearl and pupils of pyrite, terracotta pipes, musical instruments, and thousands of other objects from the great Aztec culture. But perhaps the most precious is the Sunstone. Archaeologists studied the disk for years in an attempt to reveal the mystery of its symbols. Today, they think they have the answer. The Sunstone is a calendar, actually a double calendar. The complicated symbols refer both to a division of time based on religious precepts, where the solar year is 260 days long, and to a non-religious one, which divides the year exactly into 365 days. Other symbols describe the life of the planet, breaking it down into 5 solar ages, the so-called cosmogonic suns, and date the creation of the world to the 13th of August, 3114 BC, and its end to the 22nd of December, 2012. There are different interpretations, and there are certainly many mysteries still hidden in the signs inscribed on the sunstone by wise hands. Perhaps time alone can give us the final answer. Mexico City today is one of the world's largest capitals, and unfortunately, one of the most polluted, with millions of vehicles. It is a city of contradictions, where skyscrapers crowd the center and miserable shanties form a belt in the vast outskirts. Much has been done to restore dignity to the Indios, the direct descendants of the Aztecs, but the wounds inflicted by a brutal conquest half a millennium ago are still visible everywhere you look. There is one area, however, in the south of the city, where one can still find solace in the ancient ways. Called Xochimilco, this part of the modern city still conserves characteristics of the ancient Tenochtitlán. It has canals that wind among the chinampas, the floating gardens that were obtained by draining the swampland, the same technique that allowed the Aztecs to create their capital. On Sundays, the zone becomes crowded with people having their meals on brightly colored boats, with mariachi bands playing music, singing of unrequited love, sad songs, just like this poem written over 500 years ago by an Aztec prince. Shall I thus pass away like the flowers that fade? Will there be nothing left of my name, nothing of my fame on earth? Let there at least be flowers. Let there at least be song. What can my heart do? Without purpose, we passed through this world. But they did have a purpose. The Aztec warriors and the rulers who gave their lives in defense of this great civilization may indeed have felt a desperation at the end. But there is something left of their fame on earth. And the flowers are here too. But they're made of stone, and they're called pyramids. And they have the sun to crown them for all eternity.